I can feel for the person, I can be interested in their lives, but still feel like this is not something I support politically. It's ideologically very far from who I am.
I am thrilled today to be speaking with Aisha Jamal, Canadian programmer for the Hot Docs Film Festival and director of The Theft. Aisha, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Hot Docs is a special kind of year. I mean, our time of year. Um, and I was wondering in your mind, what excites you about this festival? What is it that makes it so important to the city?
You know what? One of the things that I really love about hot dogs is the fact that I feel like we've got a little bit of everything when it comes to documentary. Like hot dogs' identity is not just political films or like arty films or films that have been made originally for TV, but it's a little bit of everything. And I think for me, that's really exciting. We're a city that's so diverse. There's so many different kinds of people, so many different types of tastes of things. And I feel like to have one documentary festival that offers a bit of everything is kind of awesome because you can make it your own. And if you're a person like me who's really curious about a lot of things, you get to sort of jump genres and jump uh, countries. And like to me, that's really exciting.
I hear what you're saying because I think, one of the most powerful things about documentaries, I think, is the justice aspect of it. But there are so many stories here. Like you said, it's a gambit. It's a wide gambit of styles and narratives and voices from around the world. It's pretty special. Um, why do you, in your mind, why do we need documentaries? Because I feel like over the last 10 years, they've made a huge comeback in the public eye, younger audiences latching on to them.
You know, I don't know who said this, and I wish I remembered the person, but they said that journalism is there to give us the facts about the world, and documentary gives us the feelings. And I feel like that to me is kind of a way to think about documentary. Like, what is it what is it to be a person who's a shepherd in the mountains of Italy? Like, what does that feel like? What's your daily rhythm? What do you think about? I think documentary provides an insight that goes beyond journalism, although there are journalistic documentaries, and I feel like that's a whole subject of its own. But it does allow you to go beyond headlines, beyond sort of short little stints. And documentaries involve, all the different arts. You've got the visual, you've got the sound element, you've got the narrative element. And I think that's something that's quite unique. And this day and age, we certainly need documentary as a way to connect to each other across the planet, considering, what troubles we're in.
I love that idea. Can we talk about that more? Because this idea of connecting across the planet, I think is something that we don't often. I mean, somebody puts on a documentary, you think of, wow, okay, that happened, or that's happening over there. But there is something about a relationship to our global community that really stems through a festival like this.
Yeah, this is the year where I truly felt like the most challenged by some of the films that I previewed because there were some films about unsavory people, unsavory subjects, and I felt like, wow, I was feeling, for example, one film, we didn't program it in the end, but it was a film about a Taliban in Afghanistan. And for me, the Taliban are like abhorrent people. It's a civil dictatorship. I have nightmares about them. And this film was following the day-to-day of a Taliban. He was working a road check or something. And I found myself really feeling for him and his brother. And I thought about their humanity and I thought, oh, their humanity overrides their politics.
Mm.
And in a way, I was like, feeling for his childhood, feeling for his present day, and this idea of feeling lost and really, finding himself in this radical fundamentalist movement in a way. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like what documentary does do. It's like the humanity of a person and the soul. You connect to something deeper. Doesn't mean I like the person, doesn't mean I agree with them, but you still certainly get an entry point into something that you wouldn't necessarily want to come close to otherwise.
See, that's interesting. I like that idea is because I think we lose that. We tend to are willing to give up the humanity
Mhm.
of people that we don't see eye to eye with. But this sort of filmmaking does help us to see past those differences sometimes.
Yeah, and I think like the one thing I'm always scared of, and I think most people are, is that when you watch these films and you feel for them, you're like, wait, does that mean I am sympathetic to their viewpoints. And then you're like, okay, no, 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 no. I can feel for the person, I can be interested in their lives, but still feel like this is not something I support politically. It's ideologically very far from who I am and what I stand for. But I still believe that we need to understand the world and all its complexity.
I love that. I mean, I certainly love that about documentary, but I love that about film in general. This idea of actually letting people's stories connect with who we are, even if we don't agree.
100%. And I think that's so, so, so needed. And I always think about the power of storytelling about, in that way, where you think it's time to spend with somebody that you wouldn't necessarily meet if it's through a book or through a film. I think personally, I'd argue film is richer because, as I said, it's all these other layers and this complexity in a way. Um, but yeah, like I mean, we have a film at Hot Docs this year that's about these three performance artists who make a pact with each other to explore their inner witches, and as part of that, they start a black metal band. And if there's one music type I hate, it's metal. And to like watch these women start a metal band without knowing how to play instruments, but then I got so drawn into the film and into their music that I was like, I'm finding myself getting a glimpse into a community that I actually don't want to be part of. But I thought it was so fantastic. And I was like, oh, there's the power of documentary, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Since you mentioned that, I'd love to know, are there I'm sure that you're involved and excited about the whole festival, but are there any particular films that you think, man, this really challenged me or surprised me going into this year's fest?
Oh God, yeah, for sure. I think the film I just mentioned called Hex, which is from Norway, it's about a band called Witch Club Satan. That certainly surprised me. You know, on paper I look at it and I'm like black metal. Oh no! But then I watched the film and I was like, oh yes. Um, I think certainly a film called The Sandbox by Kenya J. Pinto was actually from Toronto. I definitely was like very taken by that film because I felt like it was a really interesting investigation into surveillance technology and all this rhetoric that, these cameras and these sort of like face scans are going to like keep us safe. And instead, they're often turned against really vulnerable people like migrants and refugees. And I thought that's a really intelligent argument, but also a really fascinating way to let us meditate on this topic. The film is not 100% straightforward. It's quite artistic, I would say. That's
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like one that you've seen.
It is. It is. I was just gonna say, sorry, I didn't want
Yeah,
to
no, of
interrupt
course,
you,
please
but
tell me.
Kenya Jade is we had a chance to speak with her, and that film's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
It's something that I had never seen the world through that I was gonna say through that lens, which is a little ironic given the context, but
Yeah.
it's a wild film.
Yeah, totally. And like in a different way, there's a film from Iran called Landstones. And it's a really beautiful, slow, meditative, black and white film that takes place in the desert of Iran. And it's about a man whom we don't know much about because there is not a single word of dialogue in this film. But you're watching him, wake up in this sort of man-made cave that he built, and he's a nomad. And then he goes back to his home. Like, nomads this day and age usually have two homes, one where that's sort of like their outdoor home, and then they have sometimes a more permanent like house. And it's just like his daily rhythm, and it becomes such a meditation on time, on mortality, on this sort of this change from modernity from, tradition to modernity. And I thought, wow, that too was challenging in a way I didn't expect. And I absolutely love that film.
Hmm. I mean, that sounds great. You've sold me on, well, the two that I haven't seen
Yeah.
already just there. I'm fascinated by both of those. I do want to talk about another film though
Hmm.
that didn't make it, that isn't at Hot Docs this year because it already premiered, and that's
Yes.
yours.
Yeah, that's right.
The Theft, which is just an incredible piece on repatriation of museum artifacts from the Middle East. And where did this film come from? Where did The Theft come from?
There were like a various kinds of influences that made me think about wanting to make this film, but one of the ones was that when the Taliban took over Afghanistan in August of 2021, I saw a tweet on Twitter. Like I got onto Afghan Twitter and was like looking around to like how people were reporting about this event, um, and one of the tweets I saw was from the National Museum of Kabul. They feature heavily in my film, but at that time, I was just following them on Twitter, and they had put out a tweet saying, "Look for all of these artifacts coming to art markets near you soon." And they attached all these black and white pictures, and I remember thinking, "Oh wow, like I hadn't thought about that. That in times of conflict, of course, like precious artifacts go missing." And that started me thinking about Afghanistan's cycles of conflict and its sort of really unknown but precious kind of ancient history. And at the same time, a friend of mine who's an artist, Samir Farouk, was making really beautiful, beautiful work in Toronto on the idea of repatriation and thinking about, if we did send back all of the questionable things that are in museums in the Western world, what is left?
Mm.
We'd have feelings of grief, but we probably also would have feelings of renewal. What are the objects and collections that we could put in their place? And I thought that was such a beautiful, poetic way to think about what is the fear of sending things back to countries that are asking for their stolen objects. So that kind of all came together, and it made me think about an article I had read by a Canadian journalist named Matthew Aiken, and he had written about one of the Ghazni marbles, one of these marbles that came from a 12th century palace and had ended up in Hamburg. And it was a beautiful article. He asked a lot of questions that were really pertinent, and he focused on this one particular marble piece. And it made me think about, okay, well, are there more? And then it turns out that the marbles were part of sort of 500 different marble panels that lined the inside of this palace. And like some of them remained in Afghanistan, and some of them were stolen and ended up in Western museums and also in Asian museums, not just Western. So that sort of got me started thinking about repatriation in the context of Afghanistan.
I mean, it's such a heartbreaking way to view history, to be perfectly honest, because I mean, we grew up, we're told here's a museum. This is this stuff, but you don't think of the relationship that we have to that history, the colonialization, that took place that stole these things and put them there. Can you talk about? I mean, you mentioned the Hasni. Am I saying that right? The Hasni marbles.
Ghazni, yeah,
Hasni.
yeah.
Um, and they're featured in this film heavily, and I was wondering, what in your mind is the power of reclaiming our story through artifacts like this?
I think one of the big things I was asking myself was like, why do objects matter? Why this panel? Like I went to the museum in Brooklyn and I saw this panel as part of my research and I looked at it and I thought, huh, if I'd come here without knowing what it is, I'd probably walk past it. Its colors are gone. It used to be painted beautiful and now it just looks like a slab of marble that has been beautifully carved, but doesn't look remarkable. But when you listen to the object, you get such an incredible history of Afghanistan. And as someone who lives in the diaspora, I have to rely a little bit on my own research and on seeing these things outside of their context to really understand where is this coming from? Why does it matter? Should it be here? And like these marbles are kind of remarkable because they were part of a moment in history in Afghanistan that was the medieval period in some ways. And Afghanistan was part of this larger empire that really had its roots in Ghazni. And so for me, that was like, wow, I didn't know this.
Mm.
And this object is like a messenger, as one of the characters of my film says, of my ancestors. And you think, oh, okay, this is how we also revere Stonehenge, for example, in the West, or other kinds of like, you know, structures that we go to visit, like in Rome or in Greece. And for Afghanistan, this is also something like that. It's like our Parthenon, for example, you know? And it's sad to see all these pieces around the world, and Afghans don't have access to them. If I, as an Afghan from Afghanistan, want to see some of the largest collection of these artifacts in Italy, I can't go because I won't get a visa.
Mm.
So, in a way, you think about that, these pieces of the puzzle are all over the world, and Afghans don't have access to it. And it wasn't legally taken. It'd be different if there was an agreement, but there wasn't an agreement. These things disappeared under the cover of war.
Yeah, I mean, we see like that's absolutely it. Is that these things have stolen a piece of history and a piece of the story of the people. that now they cannot see their own history
Mhm.
in physical form. And in your mind, I'd love to ask you about our relationship to museums then. Like how
Mhm.
what is the answer here? I mean, certainly this is something that yes, it should be sent back. Although there's that the one I think is at Hamburg,
Mhm.
Hamburg, and it's just waiting to go. Um, but
You know what? That's such an excellent question. I think it's a question we should ask ourselves when we are in museums, you know? Like, what is the answer? Like, in one way, I'm a huge museum lover. I like going to museums. I love looking at artifacts from around the world. I like making the connections between them. Uh, I live here, so I want to see stuff from other places in some ways. But I guess the thing that I've definitely learned through making this film is that we have to ask ourselves some hard questions when we go to a museum and we see an object and ask ourselves, like, should it be here? There is something about justice and equality in a way, like where you look at an object and you think, how did you get here? And should you be here? And I don't think the answer is to rip every object out of a museum that's from Afghanistan and send it back and like dump it all back at the National Museum that has no capacity to take it in right now. But I do believe that there is a conversation you have to start with the people from that country to say, we have your object. Can we come to an agreement? Either that's profit sharing, or that's an agreement, a lease agreement. We take your object for a while, we send you an object, which for Afghanistan is a preposterous thing for me to say because one of the things my film asks is, can you trust the Taliban? But so I think that the answer is not always return the object right away. I think there's financial payoff, there's lease agreements you can make. You can consult the people of the country and see, what would they want you to do with this object. I think there's been lots of creative answers that aren't always just pack it up, put it on a plane, give it back. So I think for me, what's important is that when I walk through a museum, the stories become more complicated. And like life is not black and white. We should be able to hold some of this complexity within us and look at something and think more, stratified about something than just be like, this is the right answer. It's like, no, actually, let's think about this. What could we do?
I love that, especially like you said, you know, with the relationship that we see in this film with the Taliban, and museums and history itself. Um, this is a very complicated question with very
Yeah, I mean, the
complicated.
Taliban are not very trustable. Like one of the moments in my film that several people told me makes them cry is when the Taliban blew up the Bamiyan Buddha.
Yeah.
If you remember in 2001, they blew up a really ancient standing Buddha, one of the largest Buddha figures in the world. Um, And I think that their previous regime, this dictatorship, was very, very hostile to ancient Afghan history because Afghanistan was a very famous Buddhist country for a while before, Islam mass converted the country. And I think you have to think today about the fact the Taliban have changed, their tune. Now they say we are the protectors of Afghanistan's heritage. And you have to ask yourself, number one, why would they say that? Number two, what do they gain from it? Um, and can you trust that? Which is a big question, right? So I think the film also says that sometimes the answer is it's simpler when you're dealing with Iraqi objects that were taken during the American invasion of Iraq, you know. But when you think about Afghanistan, it's a bit more complex.
Mm, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, Aisha, like that, I know we're sorry, we're out of time here. I would love to keep chatting, but we are out of time. I really appreciate the chance to chat with you about it, both about the festival and this film, because this film is very special, and I do look forward to what's coming with Hot Docs this year. And just before we go, how can people get involved with the festival? And I know with your film, it's streaming on tvo.org, I think, at this point.
That's right. So my film you can stream at tvo.org if you're in Canada. And then for the festival itself, I mean, if you're thinking about getting involved, let's say on a more intimate level, you can definitely volunteer. But if you're thinking about coming to the festival, certainly, I mean, visit our website, get some tickets. Yeah, I mean, This year we have a program that's the same size as last year, which means it's a lot more manageable than it has been in past years. So once you start cruising the website, I'm sure you're going to find tons of films you want to see. We do have special packages, like 6 films at a deal. So that's also a great thing to do is to get a package and, genre hop, country hop.
I love that. It's kind of like a buffet. It's like there's
Oh
so many
yeah,
good things
100%.
there. It's like
Yeah.
where am I going to sample from? I love that. Honestly, Aisha, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Aisha Jamal, Canadian programmer at Hot Docs and director of The Theft, which is now available on streaming. Thanks so much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much. It was great to chat with you.
Great chat with you too. Have a great day.
Okay. You too. Take care.